Welcome to the Scandinavian Mind podcast, our weekly show about how technology is changing the creative industries. Today on the program, a new era of brand building. We are speaking with Christopher Morency and Tom Garland, founders of the London-based brand consultancy Edition Partners, as well as the insights platform and newsletter State of the Art. We talk about the need to build a brand universe, what community actually means, their best examples from global fashion and entertainment brands, as well as their personal favorites from the Nordics. My name is Konrad Olsson, editor-in-chief and founder of Scandinavian Mind, and I'm here with my dear colleague, our co-founder and creative director, Erik Olofsson Havikko. How are you, Erik?
I'm very good, thank you. Excited to be back on the mic. Let's try to make it a habit.
Making a rare appearance on the podcast, and I'd love to make it a habit. Last time we spoke was about our own kind of agency efforts with Scandinavian Mind. I think one of the reasons we wanted to speak to Christopher and Tom is because, first of all, really inspiring guys. We're both fans of their newsletter. We actually had Christopher on the podcast back when we did Scandinavian Man a few years back. Both of them obviously have a long-standing background at the high snobiety. Now they're running their own consultancy, so we want to get into all that and what brands can learn from their insights. But Erik, I wanted to have your take. Why did you think it was important to speak to Christopher and Tom?
I've been following very tightly their rollout of their report, which is super impressive, and how they rather elevated it to a thesis more than a report. And I just find I just find it very inspiring, and I was curious to find some to ask them about our common grounds with the editorial approach to branding and marketing.
So, was there something in this upcoming interview that surprised you or that stood out in any way that you didn't expect?
I was pretty well read upon the material, so not really. But one thing that stood out was that you always felt that they were challenging you and challenging the conventions. So at one point, Tom asks me if I'm a creative director, and I'm like, I guess up until this point, depending on what you say. So sort of on you were on your toes all the time.
They kind of called you out on that one. So looking forward to sharing this conversation. And before we get into it, just a quick note that we have the upcoming Transformation Conference season beginning soon in the Scandinavian Mind universe. We are going to Helsinki in a couple of weeks. On May 29th, we will be hosting an afternoon of talks sessions, hosted together with our partners Uni Communication, and this is during the Fashion in Helsinki days. So if you're around in Helsinki and if you follow our newsletter, you will get an invite to that event. If not, you will definitely hear from those conversations and everything else that happens during Fashion in Helsinki in our newsfeed and in this podcast. All right, Erik, let's get into it. Here is our conversation with Christopher Morency and Tom Garland, founders of Edition Partners. All right, we are here with Christopher Morency and Tom Garland, the brilliant minds behind the brand consultancy Edition Partners, as well as their insights platform and newsletter State of the Art. How are you guys?
Good.
We're doing good. Thanks for having us.
Very good to have you, and very good to have Christopher Morency back on the podcast. Before we start, we have a ton of questions, me and Erik. We are big fans of the newsletter and the research paper. But before we start, we thought it would be a good idea to have you guys describe what you do. And Tom, maybe you can describe what Edition Partners is.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so first of all, we do our best to avoid the word agency. which is obviously a bit of a cliche now. You know, not many people like to describe themselves as an agency. In fact, I think an agency describes a structure that is pretty bygone in terms of the structures that have been applied. The same structures have been in place since the 60s, since the creative agencies were born in London way back then. So what we try and do is we try to move ourselves away from that. We like to refer to ourselves as a creative growth company. For two reasons. First of all, it doesn't allow people to put us in any particular box that they're familiar with. And the second reason is that everyone loves creative and everyone loves growth, right? And actually, that feeds quite nicely on into what our mission is. And it's actually threefold, I would say. So first off, it's to prove that growth itself can actually come from creativity, not just economies of scale. We've seen a big shift in this. A lot of kind of brand strategists talk about it, but actually creativity is such a key source of inspiration for so many brands, whether they are young or old. The problem is converting on that creativity. Like, how do we naturally and quite organically and effectively convert that creativity into real commerce? So first off is creativity being a proof point for economies of scale. The second is to tackle as much industry gatekeeping as we can and reduce the failure rate of great new creative projects, especially those masterminded by young people, right? The failure rate of creative projects is like nothing we've ever seen. And actually, when Chris and I got together in the first sense, we were actually just so upset at the amount of amazing creatives just not able to handle their way through the business world. So when we first started talking, we really started to think about, okay, what are the ways in which we can help supercharge these young brands, these young creatives, and really make their work not just survive, but also prosper. And then the third is to very much challenge the conventional ways of brand building practices. We believe that building brands has pretty much followed the same rubric, the same systems for many, many years, and that served many successful brands very well. The problem is that I don't think that works anymore. The channels have changed, the audience is constantly evolving, you cannot rely on the same architectures, the same systems anymore. And we've just absolutely got to figure out a way to build brands at the speed of culture, and that's really, really important. Beyond that, we're also trying to solve the problem of converting on the buzzword topics of culture and community. BOF actually released an article, or more so a case study, I think it was yesterday or the day before, called How to Create Cultural Moments on a Budget, which really struck a chord with me, right? So I worked at Heisen Novarti for 8 years, and we were constantly asked to orchestrate massive creative cultural moments for brands, and that's no easy task, right? And normally to reduce the fail rate, you have to throw a lot of money to do that. So this topic kind of struck a chord with me, and it was really interesting because it actually captures quite a lot of what we talk about. First off, the example that they use was the Calvin Klein ad that everyone's seen with Jeremy Scott Allen, right? So that's an amazing bit of culture creation. It was an amazing bit of timing. The CMO was on the BOF podcast and actually said that they had a 30% gain on, I think, underwear sales within a week, which is amazing. And actually, I think the CMO also said that their goal is not just to draft off the cultural conversation, but to drive it. And that's really important, right? I think audience members right now, they can really tell if you're just trying to co-opt a culture. You've really got to be seen to be contributing it. So, very long-winded answer, but our job is to really be a chaperone for brands to make real cultural impact and have creative projects fly.
Good stuff. So we want to break down a lot of what you just said, and we have a ton of follow-up questions. But I want to let Christopher in, and maybe we also need to describe the second part of what you use, because you have the SOTA newsletter, the state-of-the-art newsletter. I keep thinking about it as SOTA because that's how it pops up in my inbox.
That's how we pronounce it, yeah.
Obviously, you guys have a background in editorial, so maybe it's natural for you guys to do. Have an editorial leg, but Christopher, maybe you can describe the insights part of what you do.
Yeah, so Tom and I met during our time at Heisen Novarti. I was on the editorial side and Tom was on the strategy side, and we were both heading up those respective teams. We were working on a lot of the same challenges and reporting on the same challenges from different sides of the business. And, we're super excited to bring that together with Edition partners. What we also wanted to do is reframe a bit like we're doing with Edition and solve those challenges for the new generation of brands, is to also kind of cater to the new generation of readers in a different way. Now, we worked in editorial for a long time. The formats had kind of been the same as we saw in the agency world on the business side as well. Reports were very long-winded. I was part of the problem as well, writing many of them. But we wanted to break it down in a different way where insights and thought leadership could be a bit more digestible. So what we started to do is, instead of writing big reports for our business, that's a great business card for us. We also wanted to do it a bit of a different way. So we broke it down in different articles as opposed to a long-winded 100-page PDF report. We wanted to have a bit of a bigger social play, adopt channels that hadn't really been adopted that much by publishers like LinkedIn. Brands had been a bit better at doing that. We always joke that LinkedIn's kind of like our only social channel, and we purposely skipped Instagram. We don't think that anyone really wants to follow a big brand agency necessarily and look at all the case studies they have. It's hard to get that right. And yeah, what we wanted to do on State of the Art, SOTA as we usually call it, was to release these white papers that could both be interesting for prospective clients and partners, but also really for the audience. And what we found was that there's a lot of people in medium level roles that are kind of obsessed with these insights. LinkedIn is really taking off now. You're seeing all these people talking about insights on a weekly basis, more than I've ever seen before. But there wasn't really a space for them to do it in a digestible way. The problem we're trying to solve with State of the Art is speaking about things that are still happening in culture, really exciting to read, but always have a bit of an insight attached to it that they can really use for their respective jobs. So that started off with a big white paper that we wrote, and instead of, again, doing that big PDF report, breaking it down in 12 articles over 12 weeks. When that finished, creating new formats, whether that's interview series or weekly roundups, that could still be super quick about what's happening in culture and in fashion and insights right now. But that can kind of be consumed almost like a magazine that still teaches you, as opposed to having to go through 100 different publishers. So yeah, that's what we've been working on for the past couple of months alongside our growth company.
So I feel like a good way to progress this conversation is maybe to look at this research paper that you did and maybe pick and choose from some of the stuff that you shared. And I'm going to let in Erik in a few minutes, but maybe you can just start by prefacing this research paper and specifically around this concept of a brand universe. So why did you want to do this, and what do you mean by a brand universe?
I'll start with, I think, why we wanted to do it. And it goes back to Tom's point. I think the way that companies have been built over the past, what is it, maybe like 50 years now, has been pretty static. The frameworks that they've applied have been pretty static, even though the marketing campaigns, the way that they work with talent, the way that their messaging is done, the way that they market their new campaigns and collections might have changed season on season. The platforms might have changed and the distribution might have changed. The framework itself has been very static. And we try to think about this idea around, well, if the customer wants more now, they're kind of more fragmented in high, low, different industries that they're consuming from that are garnering their attention. Then brands need to kind of adapt to be able to cater to that in real time. And I don't think a lot of brands are able to do that at this point. So we kind of spoke about this brand universe system, which is this, what we call this harmonious interlinked system of internal and external touch points that really make a brand distinctive, sought after, and really make them stand out. And we kind of want to break that down. Well, what exactly is a brand universe across different pillars? And what we explored in the white paper was 4 different sections. So very much the brand universe horizontally, and we'll dive into that, I'm sure, soon a bit longer. How can we actually go into new industries in an authentic way, both from a revenue perspective and from a brand growth perspective? Secondly, how can we actually speak to more customer types now that brands have become so big? Thirdly, how can we find new ways to actually bridge that creative and that marketing side with the commercial and business side? And then fourthly, which we find most interesting at Edition, is what are actually the innovations and the futures that brands need to adapt to stay ahead of their competition? And we think those 4 pillars together really make up a robust brand universe, and that will put brands ahead that can really chase that brand universe and start building that. And that's across different industries, across different sizes of brands. Anyone can kind of start it. But I'm sure Tom has a few additional notes on this.
absolutely. I think in its most simplest form, the way that I describe a brand universe is that it's any brand that invests in creativity to become a universe that is bigger than its own thing. And what that means is successful brands that invest in creativity and do it to such an extent that it's successful become a constellation of inspirational content, commerce, and experiences that is able to engage both local and global communities wherever they are. Now, how that's different from a brand world, which is very much part of the kind of agency lexicon and has been for many, many years, is a couple of things. And I'll just pick a few because we've got a number of different shifts that we've highlighted in the paper. I think firstly, something that Chris touched upon is the internal and external alignment. A brand world is very much about what you exhibit on the face of the brand, whereas a brand universe thinks about how does it all become consistent between the people who work inside the brand to what you're putting out into the world. A good example of that was, and probably the inventor was probably Virgil Abloh, right? So the way that Virgil Abloh was able to bring people in, he was always championing young designers. He was always bringing people into the creative process wherever possible. And what that does is it drives all of the things that we think make a successful brand today. It drives relatability, excuse me. It drives transparency, which is something that you just have to have if you're a brand. The consumer demands it. And it also, it forces you to involve your community, right? And that means involving them in the creative process. It means having your community there when you're thinking about what products to devise. And without that feedback loop, you're never going to be able to stay on top of your consumer. So that's really important, internal and external. Another thing we talk about with brand universe that makes it different to brand world is that it's far beyond the aesthetics and it's far more connected to the actual business and the commercials of a brand. And that's actually something that all brands going forward need to understand, right? Even if you're a creative director, you need to understand what's going on the business side. And what that means is that let's say you're a Jacquemus, for example. I always butcher the pronunciation, but Jacquemus is a really good brand because they take their category expansion really seriously, right? Beach clubs, restaurants, and whatever else they're going to do. And actually, that's a really new thing, right? So instead of any brand just doing a cafe here and there and trying to do these pop-up stunts that capture people's attention for a nanosecond, brands that are really succeeding are actually looking at their new categories and new areas of business as a serious business growth driver, rather than just a kind of marketing stunt. So, like, you know, the tradition is that Chanel doesn't sell clothes online. You can only go into stores to buy the clothes, but actually they make all their money on fragrance, etc., right? And it's not just a commercial thing, right? Like, consumers really want to live in the world that brands are creating. So the more touch points that you can create authentically that drives back to your heritage and your DNA, the better.
Erik, I'm going to let you in here.
So, Christopher, what really caught my attention with your writing a couple of years ago was when you simply argued that in this attention economy, there's just no way that everything can be about product. So brands need to create talking points from other stuff. And by saying that, brands also need to be editors and publishers themselves. Was this approach sort of the starting point for the brand universe, or is the brand universe a whole other evolvement of this thesis?
Yeah, I think when I was looking at the best brands over the past couple of years, Tom mentioned Jacquemus as one of the great examples. I think Virgil, he also mentioned with Vuitton, was, I think, the best example still over the past decades. But we also see with brands long before that, right, like Armani, Ralph Lauren, Versace, that have done this very well. The category expansion stuff, understand their customer very much. But with a brand universe, how we came up with this was, originally we wrote a piece, I think it was in 2020 for Highsnobiety, called Brands Aren't Companies, They're Universes, kind of touching upon this point, kind of seeing what the reaction would be. That piece did very well, and we want to explore that in a lot more depth because we felt that no one was really formulating what exactly was happening in culture right now. There's so many shifts have happened, and people can say, well, this has happened since the past 3-4 decades, like I mentioned the examples before, but actually there's a lot more depth to it now. I think luxury specifically has grown so much over the past 5 years, revenue-wise, where you're also starting to see a lot of different customer types coming to these brands. You know, if I walk outside of Bond Street in London and go on any given day, there's a huge line of people outside of the Goyard store, the Vuitton store, very, very different customer types, buying very different things in the same line, want different things. Some come for a cup of coffee, others come for the VIP booth, others come for the quick hit that they saw on Instagram because it's going viral on TikTok, for instance. And I think this is part of the brand universe as well, where a company needs to make decisions on where they go next based off of really, really understanding who their customer types are, especially now that that customer type has expanded the amount of segments. So what a brand universe really does, almost like a methodology, is it's this red line and a bit of a filter as well. Red thread and a bit of a filter to guide brands once they understand their customers. Where should we actually head into? What platform should we adopt? What new technology should we adopt? And it kind of acts as a strategic framework almost in a way, where it allows brands to make informed decisions, as I said, where to go next. Because what we see a lot when we work with the brands that we work with is there's always the question, regardless of their size or regardless of where they're from, should we spend our money here or should we spend our money here? And how do we have the biggest impact? Is that in the business side? Is that in the marketing side? Is it a combination of two? How do we approach talent in a big way? And I think building a brand universe, really understanding intrinsically what that is for your brands, will allow you to make those decisions, even without having us in the room. And we really want to explore that to a deep, deep, deep extent. So we spent a lot of months writing this. We spoke to 50 founders of brands that were founded over the past 15 years, a lot of executives in the spaces, in tech, in beauty, and really try to unpack what these brands had done so well that allowed them to grow over the past couple of years and made them go from 10 million to 20 million to 50 to 100 to 250 sometimes. So we spoke to everyone from the Gymsharks of this world and the executives at On Running, all the way down to very exciting streetwear companies like Unknown, this collective in London, or Rare Humans, this collective in Austria. Each has different elements of the brand universe. Sometimes it's more community, sometimes it's really good ways of selling and clienteling. But together we really want to package it up, long story short, and basically say, this is, in the most intrinsic sense, how we see what a brand universe is across those 4 different pillars as I described.
Erik, did you have a follow-up or do you want me to continue?
More a follow-up to Tom. When you lean into the internal touch points, do you see that as a, like, who do you need to educate in terms of creating that company culture that is so crucial for your methodology?
We talk a lot about this. I think obviously the logical place to start that it's got to be top down, right? So the type of leader that leads creative businesses needs to be a certain type of archetype. But that's only going to get you so far, right? That's nothing new. I think the most important thing when thinking about creative people and how they work is that we can't be sat at a desk from 9 to 5 and expected to come up with new product designs, new creative proposals. That's just not how creativity works, right? Your most creative moment of the day might come when you wake up in the middle of the night. It could be in the shower, it could be whatever. So actually one of the biggest shifts that we talk about is that we always think about this shift away from hierarchy towards an ecosystem, right? And that might mean that actually you don't have people 9 to 5 in a creative company, in an office, packed in, demanded to do things on a timeline. And actually you've got an ecosystem, a network of people that you can call upon at any point, depending on what the challenge is. So I guess in terms of like who you need to educate is that I think young people coming through just naturally understand that, right? I think young people really understand that they can work wherever they want on their own timeline, and that's the best way that suits them. So I don't think they need educating. I think it's probably the people that have been in work for about a decade, or perhaps the CEOs of creative companies who are a little bit older, who need to understand that actually this is the most efficient way to get creative work to come out in its best form.
Got it. It's time to end the pseudo productivity, right?
Exactly.
Just being busy is not an indicator of being productive.
100%. And I think, nowadays, if you're going to be a creative person in the creative industry, you've got this amazing opportunity to work as a creative, right? No matter what you're doing, whether it's in design or you're coming up with different proposals in advertising or whatever. But you've got to develop your proof points, right? You've got to be able to prove that what you're creating is meaningful. You've got to be able to prove that it's can be trusted by a customer when they ultimately get to see it. And that doesn't matter when it happens. It just matters that it happens at some point.
I'd like to follow up on the kind of structure of companies, and obviously we work here in the Nordics. Companies aren't as big as they might be in the rest of the world, in London and Paris and so forth. I spoke to a founder just the other day of a kind of a upstart outdoor brand here. He, long experience, have done a couple of exits, and he's like, I want to create a company where, 10 years ago I needed 50 people or 150 people. I want to do it with 12 people. I'm curious, how do you see the structure of a kind of a modern, creatively driven company, and how does it differ between, let's say, a large, global brand and a smaller upstart?
Well, that's a perfect question, because actually, if we go right back to the start of why Chris and I started working together, the very first conversation we had was all about our shared frustration for the lack of speed in the industries that we were working in. That is absolutely no shade in our previous employers or the clients that we work with, because they very much share this as a frustration. But how that galvanizes is actually in missed opportunities, right? We get so frustrated that, given the demands of brands to move at the speed of culture, when culture delivers you a golden nugget on a plate, brands, given, especially the big ones, they're just so big and so incumbent that they're not able to move to accept that gift, react to it, and then make it a thing. So that was actually one of the kind of main reasons why Chris and I started to do business together, and that we realized that actually ourselves, by staying small, by staying nimble, we would actually be able to service these bigger brands in a way that they just can't even do, because they're just so big and slow. The other thing is you mentioned a small brand that you've worked with or you've consulted on. I think I was listening to another podcast recently, and that they were talking a lot about the rise of the global boutique, right? And what that means is that you can be a very small function, right? Just a few people in a brand or an agency, but given that the internet empowers a global audience or gives you access to a global audience, you can make a lot of impact very quickly. And we're very lucky to live in a world like that. So, I think more and more what we're going to see is more people doing more things independently away from long career jobs at bigger brands, in a more entrepreneurial way, just because they've got access to customers all over the world. And obviously what unlocks success in that is their ability to be creative and solve those problems creatively.
Got it. Christopher, any additional thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, that's spot on, Tom. I think what we speak about as well is this cross function of going into different industries to kind of generate that creativity and that speed. I think fashion itself, if we speak about that, is very much in its own bubble. We've seen this all the way from the top down over many years. And what Tom and I really like to do with Edition is go into the music scene for a quick project, go into the tech scene, speak to different types of layers in fashion, whether that's streetwear or luxury or even fast fashion at times, innovation projects, to really be able to cross-polarize the learnings that we have that ignite that speed even quicker. And we've also found that the people that we've worked with have been pretty receptive to hearing what's happening in the different industries, right? That's where newness really comes from, when we can say, why don't we try this that works really well in music? Let's test that out in fashion. What would that look like if we would take that record label model? What would happen if what we were doing in the luxury scene, what would happen if we would apply that to streetwear, for instance? And, that's a real testament to our ex-employer, Highsnobiety, as well. They've been pretty pioneering, I would say, with that approach, and always done a great job. Really speaking to the interests of people nowadays. It's not just fashion, it's not just music, it's everything together. And I think by able to have a client roster and working with brands and getting all those learnings from each of those different creative disciplines has been super rewarding for us. And I think that's what really ignites growth for a company in their next phases. And that goes back to the brand universe conversation about, how to build that. But yeah, that's something we think about a lot.
And maybe if I can just add one more thing to that, it's a really good point. Actually, it's not just us studying different industries, the music versus the fashion, and taking learnings across. We actually based our whole business not on a fashion group, not on an agency at all, right? Our influences and big inspiration were A24. And if you're not familiar with A24, it's a film production distribution studio that is now widely accepted to becoming the LVMH of media. They do podcasts, they do fragrance, they do TV shows, they do film, they do the whole lot. And we looked at them, we just thought that is such an amazing creative business. And The most inspirational thing, which I think is worth mentioning, is that when 1824 was formed, I believe the founder, Daniel Katz, he said this amazing quote, which was, he goes out and he finds neglected plants and pours fucking Miracle Grow on them. And that became the whole lens, right, for the type of films, the type of writers, the type of actors that would be in his productions, how he would define and go out and find them. And I just love that as a concept, right? So Chris and I took that, and going back to that promise and that mission of trying to help brands that are young, that are creative, that has all this promise, that's kind of what we want. You know, we want to champion the black sheep, the underdog, and pour fucking Miracle Grow on it, right, in any way that we can. And then the second inspiration of ours, again, not in the fashion world, is XL Recordings, which is a British independent record label. You're probably familiar with Prodigy, Adele, FKA Twigs, etc., etc. And Richard Russell is one of the great curators. You must read his book, Liberation Through Hearing, if you haven't already. He's one of the great curators of our time, right? And what he did so great with XL Recordings is he looked at the major model, which was championing growth and speed over everything, and went, do you know what, that's not for us. We're going to prioritize a set, very low amount of albums a year, and that's what we're going to stick to. And we're going to make sure that that produce is the best that it can absolutely be. And Chris and I, again, were so inspired by that as a concept. It's like, this is not about doing 20 different pieces of work a year or having 30 different clients. It's about having 5 to 10 really, really good ones where we can create meaningful creative work wherever possible.
Yeah, it's also putting our touch on top of that, like A24 does so well, where it's like, this is an Edition Partners project, right? And that might be arrogant to think, but that is the goal we strive towards, is to be able to see a specific project at one point, regardless of the size of the business or the industry they're in, and be able to see, our touch was on that.
I'm curious, being the visual storyteller in our constellation, how does this affect, from your perspective, like brand aesthetics and brand identities? Should they be as dynamic as the strategies, or is there a win to having a solid framework visually?
Chris, do you want to go first? I know we're going to disagree on this, which is great.
Good. I think it's a tough one. I think if the framework is in place, that's the most important thing. Again, that lens through which everything goes, whether that's the messaging and even the visual, as you said. I think about Virgil a lot, right? Because he would experiment so much, whether that was with his own Off-White brand or with what he was doing with Vuitton or his personal projects. I remember this image he once posted where he and his team, I think, did the LV logo in like 100 different ways, and like the L and the V were sometimes like a snake, and then it was like in cubes, and it was just dots. And he would apply that thinking a lot to the product itself, right? But I think because he created a framework around what that was, and because creativity was such a USP for that brand, when it came to the visualization of the graphics, he was able to do that. Now, I don't think that works for every brand, right? If it is not rooted in your DNA and it's not across everything, it will feel very fragmented very quickly. So that consistency is important, I would say, even with image making. That said, I do think there is things when they expand into different industries that you need more than slapping a logo on a parasol, right? There needs to be something else deeply rooted, whether that's a color scheme, whether that's an approach to creativity, whether that's specific collaborators that you work with, that can create that consistency for you beyond a logo. Yeah, I hope that answers your question, but yeah, that's something I haven't thought about much, to be honest.
Not something I can disagree with, actually, in hindsight. But yeah, in terms of the impact on aesthetics, I don't think, Erik, you're a creative director, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so you might not like this response. I think, excuse me. So I think the impact on aesthetics is as follows. So, and it can bring kind of full circle what we were talking about before, and how important it is that the creativity arm of a business understands what's going on the business side. I think we're seeing a pretty profound trend at the moment with the content that's working online, not just online and offline, is that a lot of it comes down to keeping it really simple, right? Doing the most with the least that you've got. So for example, actually the Jeremy Scott Allen thing with CK was incredibly simple by concept. It was what Calvin Klein has always been doing, right? So in terms of creative direction, we knew it was a Calvin Klein ad as soon as we saw it. We didn't even need him there, but they managed to pick up on the perfect talent at the perfect time, so that made that work. To go a little bit deeper, Stone Island recently with Jason Statham, very simply shot campaign. It's Jason Statham, white background, and then some kind of product info on the right. And I think that's a really interesting thing that's going on there, right? So I think what Stone Island worked out is like, we don't need to go super big on video, super big on the shoot. We can get the right person at the right time and double down on actually what the product should mean to the customer. And I think more and more we're going to start moving away from going really big on talking about brand story and actually going back to like, what does the product actually mean for people? Like, how can we prove that this product is better than a competitor? And we do need to go back to bringing the materials to life, right? Bringing the quality, the function of product to life a little bit more. And that comes through simple communications. And actually what simple communication does now is it allows an image or a message to move through culture at pace, right? Rather than a complicated 3-minute fragrance ad, right? It needs to be something simple that people can get immediately, stop the thumb when you're scrolling, and be able to understand exactly what the brand means and what it stands for. You know, another good example is Essence and all of their memes, which was done by our good friend and ex-colleague Tom Bettridge. Loewe, when they did a spelling bee, or Bottega, when they did the paparazzi shoots with A$AP Rocky. These are the small things that actually don't cost a lot of money, that are the things that capture attention and move quickly through conversation and really get people to engage and convert.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like, if it's complicated, it just won't work. It can't be complicated at all.
Yeah, even Gap, right? So when Gap did the remake of the iconic Jungle track, right, a lot of us actually, Chris and I, we were talking about it. We were like, oh, that, you know, is that lazy? Because obviously everyone's seen the Jungle ad, and really it was just a remake of that great creative music video that they did. But actually it really worked. You know, it was simple. They saw something that worked over here and they moved it over here, put some more budget behind it, and it was a fantastic success.
Speed works in that way, where if they had been the second brand to do it, it would have been late. If they would have waited another 3 months, it would have been late. So it's very much around finding that perfect moment. And that goes back to Tom, to your example about Loewe or Essence. You saw so many brands copying that, and that's what fashion brands tend to do, right? They'll copy the exact format in their own way because they feel shit. And I heard this from brands myself, like, should we be doing paparazzi shots now? It's like, well, if you were the first and it fit your brand DNA, sure, but now Bottega's done it. No. And it's not even necessarily about paparazzi shots fitting with Bottega as a brand necessarily. What it comes back to is that creativity that they're so known for, and that high-low mix of their fabrications, working with somebody like a rapper like A$AP Rocky, who is incredibly stylish, that fits their brand, has a long-term relationship with them. That format fits for them, but they're not going to be doing that a second time. They're going to move on to the next thing, right? So I think that's key, or that's the key to remember here is you can't copy the format, but you have to find your own creative approach to doing these kinds of things, this framework again, in which, like the paparazzi shot, the memes can live under.
The old quote that if you gotta explain it, it ain't working might be coming back in style.
We have a few more minutes, and I'd like to take the chance to veer into a couple of other topics that's close to our hearts. Obviously, we cover technology quite a lot, and one of the last chapters in the research paper was focused on fashion's approach to technology. So just want to double click on that and what's the kind of current state of fashion's relationship with technology? Is it good? Is it bad? Is it failing? What's happening, Tom?
Yeah, that's not a small question, is it? Well, I think it's probably quite easy to say that fashion, like many creative businesses, tends to get left in the dust when a new technical innovation comes around. I mean, take the music industry, for example. The MP3 came along and completely ruined everyone's lives for about a decade, right? And it's only in the last couple of years that they've been able to figure out the streaming model and live, et cetera, et cetera. As consumers and as small business owners, Chris and I are obviously incredibly savvy to what's going on in AI and things that can deliver us marginal efficiency gains. And a lot of the time, these big brands just aren't able to kind of keep up. I think there's a lot of opportunity. I think with technology, I think the way in which people need to think about it is that it's only useful if it's enabling your business to run more efficiently, it's empowering your people to work at a greater speed and actually allowing you to do greater creative work, right? I really don't like the idea and the narrative of AI replacing anything. I like the narrative of it supercharging whatever we can do ourselves. So that's something that we also talk about at Edition Partners, right? We have an innovation bucket in our service pillars, and we do end up kind of advising brands on how to use AI and ChatGPT and whatever it is that's coming out. And I think, again, it's just really important that we find ways to make the creative work even better, rather than just finding a robotic way to replace those people. But Chris, maybe you can add on that.
No, I just spot on. I mean, I completely agree. One thing I would add is that for businesses, they're applying a lot of technology to their marketing. You're seeing, especially in the luxury fields, obviously it's best to do it across your entire value chain. That's tough. And a good example of this is a company called Better in London by Julie Pelipas. She was the ex-fashion director at Vogue Ukraine, LVMH prize finalist, incredible woman. So for whoever who's listening that doesn't know the brand, definitely check it out. It's Better with three T's. And what they basically do is really try to rejig the whole system powered by tech and what they call smart design algorithms, which basically match the pattern with dead stock, if it has a good fit, of course, the product. And they basically plug in all these different factories that have a lot of fabrics, and they connect people's designs via a system with the right factory essentially to make whatever it is that you want to make. And then the creative directors, they get, I think it's commission or they get royalties or something like that. So it's part ownership. So in the future, what they're looking to build is that brand will never just have one creative director. It's really a system and a platform for creatives to plug in, powered by tech, and actually build something that both fights all the dead stock that's out there, but also using tech for good in a way that is not marketed about necessarily. And that's a very stark contrast at what we're seeing a lot of luxury brands doing who are using tech for aesthetics, right? And there's some really good examples, like when Jacques Mus did the AR campaign with the bags in Paris, and he continues to do that to this day. Everyone followed that, obviously, and copied that. Another good example, of course, is what Heli Temil did, an AI-driven show. They showed the backstage in AI-driven images, the model casting board, everything, while they actually did a real show in Paris as well. Another good example is what Balenciaga recently did when they took over all the screens and basically showed this AI landscape around them on these screens of a fake Paris, even though they were having the show in the real Paris. Again, fun tricks, fun innovative ideas because they were first. Anyone that kind of comes after that feels a bit tired and overdone. And then the last thing I'll say about this, when we actually were speaking to customers, because we did a small customer survey to hear about what people actually want from AI and tech for our research paper. But basically what it says was that people actually don't want AI to be used as, as just an example for marketing necessarily. That came out all the way at the bottom. What people actually like it more for is for size and fit recommendations, innovative solutions to reducing environmental impact, personalized shopping experiences. Those all came out on top, which is very straightforward, right? Like Tom said, people want tech to be used for something that's going to help their daily lives, as opposed to something that is completely new and is a marketing gimmick.
Good stuff. Another thing I wanted to double click on, obviously, we're Scandinavian mind. I know you guys have been covering the kind of Nordic market. We've only ever used a bunch of international examples in this conversation, but just any kind of best practices or use cases that you see in the Nordics that you like, or also maybe as a follow-up, something you think we should do better here. I know it's a broad question, but any examples is highly appreciated.
Chris, maybe I'll go first because any opportunity I get to talk about our legacy, I take it. So it's also a good opportunity. I love it. I love those guys. Joachim's done such an amazing job along with the team. I've been a fan for many, many years, but it's a really good example of a brand universe not necessarily needing to be massive. right? So when you think of the concept of a brand universe, you think, oh my God, it's got to be this huge thing with loads of money, and that's the only way that I can become a universe with all these different diverse touch points with a customer. That's not true, right? Brand universes can be loud in small corners, and I think that's really what Our Legacy do. You know, you go to their store in Soho, it's tiny, but the staff in there are incredible, and the way in which they kind of introduce you to their world and bring you in, and the content that they do, the collaborations that they feature as well, is a masterclass in brand universe building, right? And you know, I'm as you can tell, heavily biased here, but I think they are just such a good example, and set such a good example for young brands coming up, because they stuck to exactly what their DNA was, and they're not a young brand, you know, they've been doing it for quite a while now. And they've constantly been able to innovate with the shapes, the designs, but there's always this kind of Our Legacy core. And they've also, I think this is another really important point, which I love about Our Legacy, is that they really got the price point right. You know, when I'm wearing Our Legacy, I feel like I'm wearing a high luxury brand, and that comes down to the quality of the product, the designs, and the world that they've built. But I also don't feel like I've just spent my entire wallet. You know, like they've kind of coming in just under Acne, but still expensive enough where I feel like it's a really aspirational product. And I think, you know, we're moving into an era where, especially young people, they are so digitally savvy. They know where to get a look-alike product from another brand. You've got Zara turning up on high streets looking like the Row. So you've got to be really, really careful in what distinguishes yourself. And I think Our Legacy have just done such a fantastic job. But Chris, back over to you. Shut me up.
No, that's a great point. I completely agree that brand universes can be of all sizes, and I also think brand universes don't necessarily have to be loud. You know, you can also have a very quiet brand universe that is small and that is pretty subtle in their approach. And Saman Amel, the Stockholm-based brands, we've known the guys for many years. I've never met in my life a well-rounded brand universe of like that size, and that small, and that level of care that they have. And they talk a lot about this thing's 3-star responsibility that they got from a restaurant plaque somewhere from one of their friends who owns a restaurant. After they got 3 Michelin stars, the guy basically said, great, now we have this, now we have to keep this up every day. So we have this 3-star responsibility to keep up this level of quality every day. And they really took that to heart. And you see it in everything that they do, from the way that they train their staff to coming into that office for the first time, the sort of customer journey they have, and customer interaction design in the physical sense. When you go to their atelier, every room is a different experience, but not in a gimmicky way. The way that they keep up with their clients and their customers, they remember conversations. They'll make sure to also expand that brand universe slowly into art, into literature, things that they're personally passionate about and can bring their audience along with for the ride. And the way that they talk about themselves as well as these curators of taste, where they want to take their audience by the hand and not just show them new ways of tailoring for the modern man, but also bring them into the art scene, as I said, and kind of educating them about this is what our taste is, this is how you create taste, etc. And their retention rate, because of it, has become so incredibly high. Even though the price point is very high, they've been able to collect this real community, I would say, of creatives who are nerdy about tailoring, but come back for the culture and the brand universe that they've been able to craft over the years. So yeah, I think that's a company definitely worth looking at next to Our Legacy.
So 2 good examples. Erik, I'm going to let you have the second to last question, and I'll round it out.
A final touch upon communities. Have you been able to build a community yourself?
That's a good question, actually. I mean, Tom and I, we often joke that we come from like very different aesthetics and different interests, and it kind of unites around culture. So even like the Our Legacy Saman Amel example we just mentioned is literally this. Tom has been very plugged into the music scene. I've always been a bit more plugged into the fashion scene specifically, with great interest in art as well. We bring different types of communities with us, I would say, to our collaborator network. You know, we're not a brand in the traditional sense where we produce products or anything like that that we can create community around. So for us, it's very much around the creative collaborators that we can bring in, which I think have the same mindset regardless of their background or the creative discipline, but come from different sides or the different sides of the same coin.
Yeah, I think short answer, yeah, that's what we're trying to do, right? Just like any brand, I think, you know, we're nearly at 5,000 subscribers on Substack, and they are all community members, right? We invite them in whenever we can. Having an open dialogue with them, like I suggested at the top of this podcast, is really important. So we constantly go back to them asking, you know, what do you want to hear more about? Sometimes the answers are surprising, but that's really what we want to do. And you know, to maybe zoom out a little bit on the topic of community, you know, this might be obvious to some other people, but I realized that actually the word unity is in community, and I don't think people give that enough space or think about it enough. And unity quite literally means being in a state of being united or joined as a whole. And I think the world really needs that, right? And I think creating kind of moments of connection, contribution, things where people can do things together, whether you're a brand or a publication or a creative growth company like ourselves, is just so important, right? Feeling like you're part of something, that you're driving to do something together. So it's a really important thing for Chris and I that we're able to build a community, but also work with the community to create something that everyone is really proud of.
That's a beautiful note to end on, and I'm gonna let you guys just pitch yourself one last time before we close out. We have a lot of brands in the Nordics listening to this podcast. If you want to interact with you, work with you, are you open for business? How does it work, and what's on the kind of horizon in the next
very
year?
kind to give us the opportunity. And first off, thanks so much, guys, for having us on here. To keep it really short, Edition & Partners is a creative growth company, and we specialize in research, strategy, partnerships, and innovation. If you look at it this way, if you're thinking of doing something bold, if you're thinking about taking a big risk, but you're a little bit scared, bring us in. We'll do a lot of the heavy lifting, we'll do a lot of the due diligence, and we'll make sure that that risk is a creative mission worth taking.
And make sure to subscribe to stoicthatclub.substack.com. Last plug.
Christopher Morency, Tom Garland, founders of Edition Partners, thank you so much for sharing your insights today.
Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.